Good morning, everyone. This is Randy at Central Region STI. Thanks for joining this morning. We're going to go ahead and get moving with our third and final transition to the National Blend of Models webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining early this morning. We appreciate it, and we appreciate also having some guests from Western Region on the line today as well. So we'll just go ahead and I'll turn it over to Bruce to get us started.
Excellent, Randy. Thank you. And yes, good morning, everyone from multi-regions. Welcome to this morning's webinar. As Randy said, this is the third and final webinar that we've provided in preparation for our transition to the National Blend here in Central Region. We provided one webinar late last week, one yesterday, and today is our third. And of course, today at 17:30 UTC, Forecast Builder will point to NBM 3.1 as our common starting point rather than SuperBlend. So a big milestone indeed. So we wanted to have these webinars just as an opportunity to look back at a lot of the effort and hard work that's gone into getting us to this milestone, and also provide an opportunity for us to look ahead. Our work is certainly not over, so we'll take a look ahead at the work before us as the NBM continues to evolve and it increasingly becomes probabilistic information. So today's webinar is really a collaborative effort. As you can see on the screen, we've got input from our Central Region Grid Methodology team, our Central Region Culture team, and several of us here at Central Region STI. Presenting today will be Jerry Wiedenfeld, ITO from the Milwaukee office. He's representing the Grid Methodology team. Andy Just will be speaking, obviously here from Central Region SSD. Also speaking will be Audra Henneke, representing the Central Region Culture team. She's from the Topeka office. And Randy Graham, Deputy SSD Chief here in Kansas City. I also wanted to briefly recognize the efforts of some other folks that helped contribute to this presentation, including Brooke Higgenhoff from the Des Moines office, Andy Bailey from Pleasant Hill, and Chuck Greif from Jackson. So obviously our discussion on the NBM is nothing new. This has been a work in progress for a number of years. Been planned for some time, and what we've got on the screen now is just a handful of high-level documents within the agency that have really pointed us in this direction and made a case for the importance of a common starting point, working toward a collaborative forecast process, and promoting greater consistency and less grid editing within our operations. You can see back in 2017, the operations and workforce analysis document referenced the idea that we should develop a collaborative forecast process that leverages technology, the NBM, and reduces grid editing. That began to really get us moving in this direction with common starting point concepts, SuperBlend evolution, and our work toward the NBM. Then also in 2017, version 1 of our Central Region Weather Ready Nation Roadmap challenged us to explore the National Blend of Models as a foundation of the common starting point as the NBM continues to mature, and we've certainly done that, and version 2 of our Central Region Weather Ready Nation Roadmap will be released this fall. And then most recently, the NWS Strategic Plan 2019-2022 challenged everyone to harness the power of ensemble modeling as the starting point for NWS forecast operations, and to quantify certainty and promote consistency across all NWS service areas. So again, our discussion on the NBM is nothing new, and it's certainly supported in a number of very important documents over the last couple of years. So what we'll be talking about today. Here's a quick breakdown of some of the key topics. First and foremost, this is the time to reflect a little bit, take a deep breath, and really take a little pride in what we've done here in Central Region. And a hearty congratulations is definitely in order. We've got reason to be proud of the accomplishment of transitioning to the NBM. But as we'll point out, of course, our work is not over. So we'll have an opportunity to look back a little bit at the work leading up to NBM implementation, most notably work within our Central Region Grid Methodology team. We'll also talk about the NBM in the context of our ongoing culture change. And of course, NBM implementation, a common starting point, collaborative adjustments, fewer grid edits that are mainly targeted for high impact targets of opportunity. That evolution will allow us to provide greater partner engagement and IDSS, which is perfectly consistent with the National Weather Service Service Delivery Document, which was delivered last calendar year. This will also provide us greater opportunities to emphasize the very near term of the forecast And we've got a working group in Central Region focused again on the ESTF, and you'll hear more about that later this calendar year, but that's going to increasingly become a very, very important part of our forecast process. And the NBM evolution is also providing us greater opportunities for training, consistent with our blue sky culture. We've rolled out a few new training initiatives this year, and we've got plans for more down the road, which will allow us to work smarter and make better use of our time. As far as the nitty-gritty of the NBM, Andy Just will be saying a bit on technical aspects of the NBM. For example, a brief comparison of the NBM versus SuperBlend. Jerry Wiedenfeld will say some words on that as well. There'll be some discussion about the NBM cadence, how that information flows hour to hour, all the new models that are in each run of the NBM and how that changes through the course of the day, specific NBM components, and a little bit of the science behind the NBM. Now that said, I will say that in no way, shape, or form will today's presentation cover the NBM thoroughly. It's a very complex statistical system, so any discussion on that today is going to be very brief, but it should give you a little bit more background. Also regarding the NBM, one point I hope you get out of this is that, as I've said already once or maybe twice, this is a milestone and an important milestone, but our work is certainly not over. We've got plenty of work still ahead. With 3.2 this fall, new probabilistic information will be introduced, and that will really explode with NBM 4.0, and when a lot more probabilistic information will begin to be delivered. So we've got a lot of work ahead as far as properly leveraging that into our IDS messaging, our IDSS messaging going forward. Also, in today's presentation, there'll be some word about feedback opportunity for you to isolate issues that you're noting in the NBM that are impacting your IDSS messaging that are occurring on a systematic basis, and there'll be a survey for field forecasters to provide input up the chain so that we begin to isolate these issues, look for consistency, systematic errors that rear their head and impact your IDSS messaging, and then we'll look for the best way to attack those issues. And then finally, at the end of the presentation today, there'll be an opportunity for question and answer. So during the course of the presentation, feel free to jot in questions, type in your questions within the GoToWebinar interface. You can raise your hand at the end of the presentation, and we will address every question that comes along during the webinar. So please, I encourage you to ask questions freely as we go through this morning. So let's just take a brief moment and look back over the last 10, 12 years in the evolution of the development of a common forecast starting point here within Central Region. And the Central Region Grid Methodology team has really played a critical role in that evolution, as you can see on your screen. The team was first formed better than a decade ago, back in 2008. And at that point, the team was experimenting and looking at various sources of blended model information to start the forecast process. Jerry will speak a little bit about this, but there were a variety of models that were in developmental phases that gradually evolved toward where we are today. But there was the W model, the cons-all, bias-corrected cons-all, all blend, and that finally led to SuperBlend that we know as of today. So a lot of great work that started back in 2008. We had a day 4 through 7 policy along the way there that started in 2011, ESTF policy in 2013. We had an experiment with WPC in 2015. Then in 2015 as well, Andy Just, member of our Central Region Grid Methodology team and then ITO at La Crosse, began developing Forecast Builder. And he was really looking to address two main issues. First, to efficiently deliver a common forecast starting point within GFE, and also to promote solid science to the P-type forecast challenge. And we know that as a top-down technique. So Andy's work in 2015 then led to Forecast Builder experiment in 2016, 2017. And you may remember those test beds that were set up at 10 WFOs across Central Region. And shortly thereafter, 2 years ago, and shortly thereafter in 2017, Forecast Builder became the official policy region-wide. And SuperBlend was used to forecast, to initialize the forecast for periods through date 7. So a lot of great work, and you can see then that continuum culminates where we are today with a lot of the work that those folks have done, culminating with the NBM that we'll begin to populate with later today. So while we certainly should take pride in how far we've come, in many ways, as I said, our work is clearly not over, and in some ways is really just beginning. So what I want to say on my final slide here is just that there's a lot of ongoing work, both regionally and nationally, to support the National Blend, and you'll be hearing from these teams as we continue to move forward. Regionally, our grid methodology team, all the great work they've done, that team is not going anywhere. They'll continue to promote good grid practices within Central Region, and their role will be evolving somewhat going forward to really help look at some of the improvements to the NBM that we can begin to look toward, and finding the right subject matter experts to put their eyes on some of the issues to continue to make the NBM as high quality as it possibly can. And then we have our Central Region Culture team. Both of these teams are great partnerships comprised of both bargaining and non-bargaining members here within Central Region, which are continuing to promote our Central Region Weather Ready Nation Roadmap, version 1, version 2, and to continue to evolve our operations. And then nationally, we have Central Region representatives on a number of high-profile national teams, again, continuing to support the NBM evolution. We've got the NBM Science Advisory Group, or SAG. There's one member from each region on that team. Our representative is the Sioux in Detroit, Greg Mann. And that team is really working closely with Jeff Craven and the developers to continue to help them with critical decisions to again, evolve the NBM and probabilistic information as best as it possibly can. We also have a national forecast builder team. Andy Just is the team lead for that, and John Gagan, our Sioux in Milwaukee, is our regional representative on that team. And this is really a relatively new team that basically stemmed from the fact that Andy was getting more and more requests outside of Central Region for support on Forecast Builder. So rather than having a lot of one-offs and a lot of variations in Forecast Builder crop up around the Weather Service, we wanted to have one unit that was basically looking to support and develop that piece of software. We also have the NBM training team. Its purpose is perhaps self-evident. And our regional representative on that team is Randy Graham here at SSD. And then lastly, we've got the National Smart Internet team, and that's a critical team helping to promote consistency in operations with grid services as well nationally. And Jerry Wiedenfeld and Andy Just are our regional representatives on that team. So the point here again is a lot of regional and national teams that are continuing to recognize the fact that this is not a finishing line. This is a work in progress, and they're going to continue to put a lot of effort into developing the NBM going forward. So with that, I will now pass it over to Jerry Wiedenfeld, and Jerry's going to speak a little bit more about the evolution of blends here in Central Region.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, so the NBM really is just the next step in what's been an ongoing effort since about 2011. If you remember way back in 2011, we started with a small test bed of which we were trying this idea of starting with one consistent model. And that model at that time was the W model. This was sort of the hot hand model. It looked at the last 7 days. It was really the first sort of blended model that we had been working with. That model didn't really prove to be the best thing to work on in the long run. So we ended up transitioning to Consol and then BC Consol for the mountain sites. This worked for a while, but we needed some tweaks to it. So then we moved on to All Blend and BC All Blend. Again, BC was used in the mountain sites, and All Blend was used for the rest of the sites. This was 50% official, previous official, and then the other 50% would be the mono blend. And then finally, we sort of settled in here on the SuperBlend. And SuperBlend was a weighted blend. We've been using this for quite a while, and it's really been, you know, a change of how we've approached things. We started using these targets of opportunity to do these grid edits. Now the NBM here, you know, has been in development for quite a while as well. I mean, it's been using a lot of the information that we've been providing with the blends that we have here in Central Region, and SuperBlend was vital to NBM's development. So a lot of NBM is very similar to how SuperBlend, and it should have a very similar look and feel to it. There's some key differences here, and that's that NBM is supported nationally. It's supported on the WCO supercomputer. And so that will provide a lot of valuable consistency for us that we've been waiting for. Andy will dive into a little bit more of that detail. But you know, it's a very important step here. This is the next cog in the wheel for us, and it's going to really help get us going on these targets so we can move forward. And we're still going to be using the same meteorological and statistical analyses that we've been using. It'll allow us to spend more time on that, in fact. And we can now spend a little bit more time on the ESTF period, because we shouldn't have to worry about some of these differences we're seeing in days 4 through 7, just strictly because SuperBlend was loaded with a little bit different set of models from site to site. NBM will always have the same model set and will always be delivered at the same time for us. We will be able to work on messaging for our forecast with our core partners, because we won't have to worry about some of those details that we had to worry about before. So, like I said, this has been an ongoing process. We here in Central Region have been working directly with the main developers at MDL to ensure that this NBM is going to be a top-performing model. And we will continue to work and provide feedback, as Randy will be mentioning later on. So with that, I'll send it on over to Audra, the member from the CR Evolution or CR Cultural team.
Thanks, Jerry. As it was just mentioned, this transition to the NBM, it really is just another step of our evolutionary process and how we handle the forecast process and handle our operations. And that's a good thing. We want to be evolving in how we operate. We want to be taking advantage of the resources that are available to us, the latest technology, so that we can work as effectively and efficiently as possible. So these are good changes that we're making and helping to move our agency forward. And as we take this step on our journey evolving to the NBM, it's important to think about it. It's not just another model that we're talking about here. It's not just another blend or even just a data upgrade. This transition, it really can and should be serving as an opportunity for our agency to pivot towards a more IDSS-focused future. And it's important for us to take a step back sometimes from the process and ask ourselves the important question is, where do we provide the greatest value? And if you really break it down, the greatest value that we can provide is providing that weather knowledge to our partners and being the communicators of our forecast, communicating forecast information to our partners so that they in turn can make well-informed decisions and hopefully more timely decisions as well, so that they can start preparing for events hopefully further in advance than they used to be able to 5, 10 plus years ago. And this also requires us to have a full understanding of the different potential outcomes that we could see in interpreting this forecast information. What's the most likely scenario? What's the least likely weather scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Helping to communicate that to our partners so that helps them in their planning and decision-making process. So when that gets tied into the overall forecast process, that really does require us to think about it, not just meteorologically speaking, but statistically as well. One of the benefits that is really important to note in making this transition, not just to NBM, but just how we are evolving the forecast process overall, it is helping to unlock time for us so that we are also better utilizing our staff, so that we are putting some more time into where we can provide that better value, focusing on providing that weather knowledge, forecast information to our partners. So by freeing up time through the NBM process, it allows us to have more focus on targeted impact-based messaging with our partners. And that's likely going to be in the short term and helping them in a weather event that's expected for that day or within the next couple of days. But these time unlocks, as we transition to NBM, it also allows us to perform local project work on areas of expertise, building up our proficiencies, and also engaging with our partners during the quieter periods. Let's face it, the last couple of weeks weather-wise have been very busy, very active, and as a result, there has been a lot of partner engagement during this active stretch of weather. It's important to make sure that we have those relationships prior to engaging with them during active weather, and so that when we are working with them during these more active times, we already have a foundation built. The relationship is not just starting We're instead building upon those relationships that we've already been working on. But it's important to take advantage of the quieter periods to work on that and better understand their needs so that we can better serve them during the more active times in the weather throughout the calendar year. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it back over to Andy, and he's going to discuss the science and the technical overview of the NBM.
All right. Thank you, Audra. So yeah, as Bruce stated earlier, there is no way I can cover all about the NBM in this presentation. The NBM is literally a beast. I mean, there's a lot going into it. I'm going to try and provide the best I can for a technical and science overview, but certainly if you have questions, feel free to post them on in the go-to question box, or raise your hand at the end, or feel free to send an email to myself or the CRGMAT, and we can try and get answers for you. So a quick overview for the NBM. It's run on the supercomputer, or WCOS as it's titled, and the beauty of this is it's supported by NCO 24/7, and really to get a model upgrade onto WCOS, it takes a lot. There's a 30-day testing period, and it's got to balance with everything else that's running on the supercomputer. So, you know, essentially once it's there, it's stable. You know, data from the NBM is shipped over the from the supercomputer through to the SBN, and then down to your office or forecast center, all at the same time. So we are all receiving it at the same time, ensuring a common starting point from office to office. And another beauty about all this is that we can have no more service backup issues with respect to applying the common starting point, because right now, if you try to go into service backup, there's no way that you can have a common starting point that's consistent with your neighbors, because we don't have, like, for example, bias corrected data sets. So what makes up the NBM? Well, one of the great things with the NBM is that we have access to data that we could never have in SuperBlend, just because the data sets are so large, and also would take a lot of extra processing power and time to do it on AWEBs. So, for example, one of the big components here for the NBM new that we didn't have for SuperBlend would be the European ensemble. One of the things I do want to bring attention to, while we have like the deterministic GFS and deterministic NAM and all these other models that we have in SuperBlend as well, but in our population that starts again with period 4 through day 7, again there's no changes there, we are not going to utilize the latest deterministic GFS. But on the other hand, we have the European ensemble. And take a note at the quote on the right, which comes out of a presentation, which I'll talk about here just briefly in a second, about the ensemble means give you 1 to 2 days of predictability over the deterministic. So I think we can take having the European ensemble and versus the deterministic GFS as a bonus. And talk about ensemble, the NBM is an ensemble. So I think we need to think about beyond the deterministic NAM, GFS, and the European. And since it's an ensemble and we can't view all of its individual components, we're going to have to utilize resources that go beyond, some of them beyond AWEBs. Take, for example, the Ensemble Situational Awareness Table, a really nice tool to look at the ensembles, look for significant weather in them. The NBM percentile information, some of that's actually in AWEBs. You can get some of it online as well. And the model certainty tool that's available in GFE, which can give you some proxies about how the NBM is working. And then I would also recommend, if you have not already viewed these Blue Sky presentations, one, Matt Jeglum from Western Region Science and Technology Division there produced this deterministic versus ensemble. Please take a look at that if you haven't already, as well as John Gigan and Jerry Wienenfeld's model certainty talk. So up on your slide right now that you see on the screen is the composition of the NBM life cycle, and you see there's a whole lot of different models in here and ensembles. The ensembles are noted there by the asterisk, and you can see there are a lot of ensembles. For example, the SREF, the GFS ensemble, the Canadian ensemble, the European ensemble, you name it, there's a lot. But if I want you to pay close attention to the items on the right here. The first column is the SBN hours. So you can see that there are only a few cycles here that go out for our period 4 through day 7 population, the 0Z, 5Z, 7Z, 12, 17, and 19. Also take note, the next column, which says new NWP, and that details how many new models or ensemble data is coming into each cycle, and you can see that every hour we are getting new information. So similarly, like how we have SuperBlend and Con Short, you're seeing the same thing here. Every hour you get new data. So for the purpose of our period 4 through day 7 initialization, we are going to basically use the 0Z and 12Z cycles, the midnight shift to 0Z and the day shift to 12Z. It should be noted that if we wanted to really make some bang for our buck on using latest guidance for our for this period 4 through day 7 initialization, it would be best, based on what I've looked at from bulk verification, to wait to the 7Z and 19Z cycles. Unfortunately, that pushes us right close to our typical 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. deadline. So at this present time, those cannot be used. But I just wanted to make that note. So how about some of the science in the NBM? One of the great things about the NBM running on the supercomputers is that we can harness techniques that would be really difficult to run on AWIPs. And an example here is the quantile map indexing, which I've shown the equation for on the right. Got to have an equation. It's a deep deep technical process, and a lot of it even goes over my head. It even took a lot of people at MDL some time to understand it. It's written by Tom Hamill, and it's essentially a process here that's utilized for POP and QPF in the blend. It's really impressive. And then also, Jerry talked about the W model before. Well, in the NBM, it's a much more sophisticated approach of utilizing the best, top performers at every point for temperature, dew point, max humidity, and wind. And it should be noted that the URMA is utilized as ground truth for these. And another science part is that the top-down technique for snowmelt and ice accumulation as well, that's utilized in Forecast Builder, is also in the NBM. So I mentioned about URMA here just a little bit ago, and the SuperBlend also bias corrected to URMA, so no change here. Thus, for you as forecasters, we need to make sure to do QC on all that automated data, whether it's ASOS, AWOS, Mesonet. Bad observations in will result in bad NBM data. Some of the top highlights right now that have been looked at are wind and QPE. WFOs should pay particular attention to the wind aspects and the RFC for the QPE. If you see any observations that are bad, partially or fully bad, communicate those to your sewer dual, and they'll fill out the form. And for the URMA, just to note here that the HER is considered as the first guest field. And I do want to make one final note, not mentioned here on the slide, but during this transition seasons for temperature, dew point, max humidity, note that the lakes will stand out, particularly for snowmelt and ice accum. I think that's fine because it's just snow and ice over the lakes, but just be aware of that. So we're definitely not saying here that NBM is perfect. SuperBlend wasn't perfect. It has its issues. NBM has its issues as well. Therefore, the forecaster is still needed here in the process. Some of the examples that we are aware of for some issues include like wind direction. You may see some odd artifacts in areas of high uncertainty. Note that this is mitigated in NBM 3.2, which will be released in November on its current plan. Wind gusts. During high impact wind events, like SuperBlend, the NBM may be too low. so you may have to go in and adjust those situations. The lake effect QPF and snow, there's been a lot of improvement in this regard over the last several NBM versions, a lot of it coming from input from our region, but offices here may still need to edit those grids. For Rocky Mountain and Appalachian Cold Pool events, there could be some issues here too, but note that the software package that's included within Forecast Builder called Edit Retention can help here. So, while SuperBlend is going away today with the 1730Z population with the NBM, all the other consensus grids are sticking around. There's no plans to remove them at this time. But if you're going to use them, keep them for mainly short-term and impactful weather, example high wind events where we know like Cons-Moss, for example, is helpful during some of the high wind events. And certainly if you are going to make any changes to the Common Forecast Starting Point, just like you did with SuperBlend, be sure to communicate them. Now the NBM here is undergoing constant improvement. I've already alluded to it here on the previous slide. And again, feedback from Central Region has already resulted in some of these changes looking ahead to version 3.2. Some examples, wind directions, much improved, such that it's even better than SuperBlend and NDFD in the bulk verification. Wind gusts will be higher for the high impact events. For the Burgoyne top-down approach that we've been testing in Central Region over about a dozen offices, that will be implemented. QPF and POP, there are improvements to the quantile map addressing or QMD, so you'll see improvements to QPF and POP. The precipitation and snowmelt ice accumulation process is going to change a bit, and these changes will improve them as they're blended for each member. Especially if you have a scenario where you have, like, say, freezing rain and snow, the current process in place would give you sleet when you actually want freezing rain and snow mentioned. That's a bimodal type distribution, statistically speaking. There will be some visualization improvements ahead. Several of us have been utilizing model certainty and see some of the great value that it provides, and we're trying to get a lot of those similar capabilities added into some online interface so we can see how the distribution of the NBM is occurring for various impacts. And one benefit here, I think, that now that we are transitioning over to the NBM is that improvements could accelerate. One of the reasons why our blends have improved as much as they have been is that we've been utilizing them day in and day out. I think the same will hold true here with the NBM. And I talked about collaboration a little bit earlier, including the fact that we're not utilizing the latest GFS or European. If for some reason that you want to include the latest GFS or European, be sure to collaborate those, perhaps even with WPC. Because like I stated earlier, the NBM is an ensemble. And really, to get the biggest bang for our buck, we really want to see what is the ensemble data doing, and see is this trend that we're seeing other deterministics hold true in the ensembles as well. And also, Forecast Builder itself has a lot of defaults in there. Should you change those, for example, add in row temperatures, be sure to collaborate them as well. Now I will pass it back over to Audra to talk a little bit more on culture.
Thanks, Andy. As we continue to talk about the NBM and this transition, this evolution that we're making in our forecast process, it actually creates a tipping point in our overall operations as well. We certainly are not operating the same way that we used to just 5, 10 plus years ago. So as we make this next step and in the forecast process of how we're including blends into the forecast process, you've heard within the last few years the concept of targets of opportunity. Well, that too is also evolving with the forecast process. And as we continue to improve our model blends, as a result, targets of opportunity themselves should also be becoming increasingly rare and predominantly should be focused in the near term, your 24 to 48 hours. And that's where our partners are making the most critical decisions during that time. So if you're trying to determine whether a forecast period you're looking at, you're maybe contemplating making a change to the forecast, it's important to ask yourself a couple questions. And asking yourself a couple questions can help you in that decision-making process of whether it's a worthwhile change or not, if it truly is a target of opportunity or not. And one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, if I make this change to the forecast, is this change actually going to impact the decision-making process of my partners? And if the answer to that question ends up being no, probably not, me tinkering a couple degrees, it isn't really going to make a change to my partner's decision-making process, then it's probably not worth making that adjustment. And instead, that time could be better utilized in other aspects of our operations, such as focusing on the IDSS that we're providing. Another question to ask yourself is, with little changes that if you're tinkering in the forecast, are you actually verifying those changes that you're making? These are the things to be asking yourself and determining what truly are targets of opportunity or not, because we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of all the capabilities that come from the NBM, but also utilizing our time wisely so that we're not wasting more time in the grids than really is what's necessary. So instead, we're unlocking that time to focus on how we can provide more quality DSS to our partners. And so, yeah, the switch to NBM, it is an opportune time for us to pivot towards that more IDSS-focused future. But just as we've been talking, as we are evolving the forecast process, it's also really important for us to take some time to think about our operational structure. Just like the forecast process has changed so much over the last few years, we're not going to be able to truly enjoy the benefits of this and how it's evolving our forecast process if we're still operating in an operational structure that's 10 plus years old, where we have short-term and long-term desks, things like that. So if your office hasn't already started having discussions about this, now's a really good time to start engaging in those conversations with your staff and amongst your coworkers. And here are some things to take into consideration. Take a look at your shift duties. Reevaluate your shift duties. Ask yourself, what are all the different tasks that do in fact need to get done throughout the day? But then assess, how many people does it really take in order to complete all of those shift duties on a quieter day and on a more active day? Figure out where you can build that flexibility into the coverage of shift duties so that we're utilizing our staff, which is our main resource, utilizing our staff as efficiently as possible. And then as you're evaluating your shift duties in your office, chances are that that can maybe result in some changes and adjustments to your overall shift schedule structure. And the goal here, by analyzing how we operate, we do want to be able to maximize time, utilize these time unlocks. So again, we're freeing up opportunity for staff members to do such things as participate in partner engagement opportunities, relationship building with them, assisting in training opportunities, participating in different partner exercises, and so on and so forth. But also by taking advantage of time unlocks and how we can restructure our office schedules to maximize that, that allows us more time to even focus on our delivery of IDSS. Be mindful of when you might have peak workload time, and that can help you in figuring out when do we really need the most people in the office, and then how can we best utilize our staff during the more active times, but then during the quiet times, how can we free up opportunities to get people away from the forecast and build these relationships with our partners. And again, focus on research, focus on projects and training and building up our skill sets so that when we are finding ourselves in the more active weather period, we are able to more efficiently and effectively utilize our resources and communicate our forecast message when it's really the most important. So as we're making this transition and focusing on how our operations as well are evolving with the forecast process, the goal is to hopefully be thinking of partner engagement just as routine as the forecast collaboration process itself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll pass it over to Randy. He's going to conclude the presentation and discuss how to provide feedback.
Thank you, Audra. So one thing we want to make sure that we gather as we go through this process is that we're getting feedback from the field as you're looking at this data. So later this morning or early this afternoon, we'll be sharing a survey form with all the offices. It has 4 questions on it. and with rooms for comments and that sort of thing. It really focuses on, of course, on the NBM output, particularly on output that would have impacted your IDSS messaging. We're looking for information about issues that would impact your IDSS messaging and that are systematic, that occur repeatedly. It's not just a model bust or a model dropout. So that'll be the main focus. And of course, there'll also be some question on there about forecast builder, if there's ideas for streamlining the forecast builder or the forecast process. And then also if you're using the NBM and the ESTF short-term period, we'd like to know that as well. And really we see this as a pathway for the field to provide input to Central Region and to the NBM developers at MDL. It's critical that we're going to have a lot of really smart people that know your forecast areas better than anyone, and you're going to be able to identify if there's any issues in the NBM output, and we want to hear about that, and the NBM developers want to hear about that. They've been extremely responsive to feedback and are really striving to make it the best blend as possible. And as Andy noted earlier, there's been some really significant, some changes that have been made based on feedback. The wind methodology that's going to be in NBM 3.2 later this fall came from input from Central Region, and it mimics in a lot of ways the SuperBlend approach. And then also the Burgoyne P-type method is going to be in NBM 3.2 this fall, and that also came from Central Region input. And those are just two examples. So they've been very responsive. If we can identify issues and provide them examples and show them that there's improvements that can be made, they're very responsive to that. So the way this pathway for field input is going to work is that we'd like forecasters to fill out the survey as frequently as possible. At the end of this shift, if there's no issues, fill it out. If there are issues, fill it out. It should only take a couple minutes, and we'd like to get as much feedback as possible so that we have some really robust results. And then the CRGMAT is going to actively monitor those survey responses, and they will look for impactful and systematic NBM issues and pertinent forecast builder input, which they will analyze, and then they would document, and then they will share that with us here at Central Region STI. And then here at STI, we will take that information and provide it to appropriate national level teams, such as the NBM Science Advisory Group, the National Forecast Builder Team, etc. But really, the linchpin of this is getting feedback from you all in the field on any issues you're seeing, and we also really want to know, like, how is it impacting your forecast process? Is it enabling you to free up time and that sort of thing? It's really an opportunity for us to just gather as much feedback as we can to continue to improve the NBM and continue to improve the forecast process. So last, just a few final thoughts. So this really is a watershed moment moving to the NBM. As Bruce discussed early in the presentation, it's something we've been working toward in Central Region for quite a long time. And we're the first region that's going to be utilizing the NBM as a common starting point. And this is really a culmination of years of collaborative effort in Central Region between Central Region headquarters, the field, the union, all working together to start with to have a common operating picture and a common starting point. And Central Region's really been a leader in moving this direction. And this is just kind of a culmination of that effort, but it's not the end. As Bruce mentioned, there's still work to be done, but it is nice it points along the way to stop and kind of realize the excellent work that's been done to reach this point. And keep in mind, we're leveraging the ensemble of output and strong statistical post-processing in the NBM should allow us to focus more in depth on really detailed scientific analysis, more on messaging, more on IDSS. One of the goals of this is to help us become better scientists, better communicators, and really be able to focus on the time periods and the elements that are really critical to our partners. One thing I wanted to mention is that where other regions are, we're not alone in moving towards the NBM at all. We're the first one that's going to use it as a common starting point. But Western Region is really pushing NBM integration in the forecast process, and there are pockets of offices in Western Region that are initializing with the NBM, and the region is pushing NBM usage pretty heavily out there. So I don't think that they're very far, not too far different from us. They're just not quite initializing everywhere yet. Southern and Eastern Region are still evaluating. Some offices are using NBM in the forecast process, And I know from some personal communication that some offices that border Central Region intend to begin initializing with the NBM right after we start doing it today. So please provide feedback. It's really an opportunity to help improve NBM and Forecast Builder, and hearing from you in the field, and your expertise and your knowledge of your local area is going to be critical to identifying any systematic issues in the NBM output that we can tackle down the road. So with that, that closes the presentation portion, and now we'd like to take questions from the field, and we'll stay on as long as there are questions coming in. So either type it into the question window in the GoToWebinar GUI, or raise your hand and we will unmute you.